decisions are seldom straightforward. So what often happens is a bit like the old story of looking for the keys under the lampshade. Since it's so easy and fun to model this sort of phenomena, people in the recommender systems field often do it, even though it's really not clear how relevant it is to group recommender systems. We'll get back to that point in a moment. So this is useful, but beware of overemphasizing it simply because it's so easy to model. Okay, the next area is the experience of group facilitators. There are people who have spent their whole lives doing this sort of thing. That is, they moderate a group discussion. I'm sure you've experienced that sometime yourself. And they have a lot of experience-based knowledge. They know how to structure decision processing into phases such as brainstorming and evaluation of options and the like. And they're also experts at advising individuals and groups about specific steps. So they'll say, for example, Anne, you're the expert on this question. What do you think of this option? So just knowing that at this moment, it's a good time to ask Anne is a sort of expertise. And by the way, it's a sort of expertise that a recommender system could in principle acquire, right? The recommender system can have some knowledge about someone's expertise and know where you are in the decision process and say, this is a good time to encourage Anne to say something. So these people have a wealth of knowledge. It's quite impressive if you read their books, how much they know. And we certainly shouldn't just ignore what they do. Of course, they do have sort of general human intelligence and common sense that a recommender system usually doesn't have. So we can't expect a recommender system to do all of the same things that this lady is doing. But still, we can pick some cherries and see which of her functions can be adopted by recommender systems or imitated in some way. Okay, now we have yet another area to look at, group decision support systems. Now, when you hear that term, you might think of some old-fashioned, huge, fancy thing that cost $200,000 back in 1985, and it required 2 experts to run. Nowadays, it's actually sort of a mainstream technology. You can sign up to a service like Facilitate Pro, which supports all those different phases of a group meeting, like brainstorming, capturing ideas, building a model, categorizing contributions and all that. And it works in sort of a familiar way with little forms where you can put in your input. So here's just a way of eliciting brainstorming type ideas. And it's done with anonymity because that's found to be better with brainstorming. And as you can see, it's basically sort of an electronic version of what used to be done with flip charts and the like. And most of these systems don't actually include recommendation technology, but they could. And in any case, they embody lots of ideas about how to support groups in a decision process using electronic means. So even if you're not impressed with the technology here, it could be a good idea to include this sort of thing simply because it makes sense as a part of the decision-making process. Again, using these systems is typically something that people do for a whole afternoon or something. So it's not exactly typical of recommender system scenarios, but still, again, if you adapt the ideas intelligently, you can make some use of them. And it's also an interesting challenge to see. You could go to the Facilitate Pro folks and offer your expertise as a recommender and say, we can make a lot of these interactions more intelligent by adding recommendation technology to them. Okay, any comments or questions so far? Okay, I hope that doesn't mean that everybody has disappeared. Sorry, I can't actually see, but let's go. Okay, yet another area that might not be so obvious is negotiation. I'm sure you've all heard about negotiation being taught in business schools and the like. And you probably imagine this sort of thing, like the leader of the Teamsters Union and the boss of some company, squaring off in a negotiation about the salary increase, the wage increase. And you might say, well, that's not relevant to me as a recommender systems person. That's but there is actually another style of negotiation called integrative, where the people are sort of cooperating to find a solution. So here you can see this guy seems to be suggesting maybe a new idea, and she's saying, hey, maybe we could do that. Yeah, you're right, I hadn't thought of that. Right, that sort of creative searching for solutions that will be mutually satisfactory is called integrative negotiation, and that is pretty typical of what we want to have with group recommender systems. If you imagine, say, 5 people planning to go on vacation together, they would like to come up with a vacation that they all enjoy, right? And they're probably not going to want to be maximally happy themselves while making their friends miserable, but rather they're going to want to find something that everybody likes. And that type of negotiation is quite relevant. Actually, any negotiation is a group decision-making process, and the special thing about it is simply that there are acknowledged differences in positions and interests, and you have to give special attention to them. But aside from that, it is a matter of trying to reach an agreement. And you'll find that many concepts and principles can be adapted to group recommendation. We'll see some examples. And just a side benefit is that if you learn about this, it'll help you in everyday life, because really life is a negotiation, as these folks like to say. Since I started learning about this, I saved thousands of dollars in disputes with agencies, and I got a paper accepted. It was about to be rejected, things like that, simply by viewing the problem as negotiation. So if nothing else, you will improve your own life by learning about this stuff. And of course, regarding this and all of the other topics, there are plenty of references in the chapter that you can download. That's why there are no references here on the slide. Okay, so those are our areas that we can benefit from. Does anybody think that I've ignored some possibly relevant area that we should decide to pay attention to? Or does anybody think that one of these areas is just a superfluous waste of time?
How about social influence? Or
okay, good question. Social influence would fall under group dynamics. Here you see chapter 7. It's
right.
Yeah, okay.
About social comparison?
Similar, yeah. Those are
right.
Yeah, okay. In other words, group dynamic, it's good to yes. That's sort of a broad term that covers all of this stuff. Again, these are things that are not specific decision making, but they're relevant to it. You know, even social comparison within a group, people are comparing themselves to others. One person will say, "Gee, I've made 3 constructive suggestions, and Mary next to me hasn't said a darn thing yet." Right? That's social comparison within the group, and it can have an effect on how the interaction works. Okay, so let's move on. You're probably wondering what use, okay, now he's mentioned all these different areas. What use can we actually make of it? Okay, now, but the first question is, even before we start looking at specific principles that we can apply, we should ask ourselves, how can we apply in principle this sort of knowledge to recommender system design? And let me give you 2 different approaches. Okay, the first one is to support interaction. Okay, so here we've got a group of people. By the way, I should say that when I show these stock photos of groups, they're all interacting with each other directly, because that's the sort of photo you can find, right? In reality, of course, when people use group recommender systems or decision support systems, they're often distributed in space and time. So you should actually have a photo of one guy in Canada and one guy in South America and all that, and interacting via the internet. So when I show a photo like this, imagine that in real life would probably be people distributed. Okay, but that being said, these people here could have their interaction be supported in various ways. These devices could constantly be saying things, hey, it's time for you to suggest your favorite idea, or you've been talking too much, or they might, this recommender system here might say it's time for a vote, and then move on to the next topic. So there are all sorts of ways in which this interaction can be supported. We'll see more examples. So the recommender system can recommend options to consider and decision procedures to use, specific steps to take. Now, this is sort of the typical IntRS way of supporting decision making. It's not very typical of how most recommender systems currently work, right? It's really sort of scenario 4 of those 4 scenarios that we looked at the beginning, with a high degree of interactivity. And it does require you to use not just recommendation technology, but also other things like ways of eliciting input and visualizing the current state of the discussion and stuff like that. But those are actually benefits as well, because what that means is these are novel opportunities to apply recommendation technology, not just recommending an overall solution, but also nudging people along in the decision-making process. And in fact, learning about ways in which recommendation technology can be combined with other forms of choice support, such as appropriate visualizations, is not a bad thing either. So I sort of assume that most of you will be applying the ideas from this talk in this way, But there is another approach. Okay, this is a bit harder to explain, so bear with me a second. Let's go back to this example of Kennedy. Now, if you look at this picture, I mean, what would you predict about how this decision is going to turn out, right? They're just basically deciding whether to go to war, right? And here we've got these 4 highly decorated generals and 1 young president. If you would look at that, you probably predict, now I bet they're going to convince him to go to war. And similarly, right, on a more mundane level with an ordinary recommender system, and say if you've got, 4 visitors to a town and 1 native, and the native says, let's go to Giovanni's Pizza, you might predict, well, the visitors are probably going to go along because they figure that the native knows what the best pizzeria is, right? So in many cases, just knowing something about the group and sort of natural allows you to anticipate the processes that will occur if the group makes the decision interactively. And then you can say, well, why don't we just skip the interaction, right? If we know that they're going to end up going to Giovanni's Pizza, why don't we just recommend Giovanni's Pizzeria? Or similarly here, if a recommender system were to look at this, they would probably say, oh, Kennedy is going to be convinced by these generals that he has to start a war. So let's just say, Mr. President, you should bomb the missile sites in Cuba. But it's actually, in fact, this sort of thing happened twice. In 1961, Kennedy got involved in a discussion of the Bay of Pigs invasion, and he was in fact convinced by the generals that he ought to invade Cuba at the Bay of Pigs, and that was a terrible disaster. And so in the year and a half after that, he learned a lot about group decision-making, sort of like we are now. And at this point in time, this was 1962, he was more or less an expert on group decision-making, and he did not let himself be steamrolled by the generals this time, but rather he made use of a very solid process and in fact managed the Cuban Missile Crisis in a historically successful way. And that goes to show that just predicting how something is probably going to turn out and then recommending that result as the result is not such a great idea. In this case, it would have led to World War III, frankly. Okay, so the idea is that the good thing about being able to predict the results of the interaction and then recommend that is that you can save the interaction time. Right, I think maybe Peter can comment on this, but in Russia, they could have saved a lot of time by saying, we predict that Putin's party is going to win because we know how elections work in Russia, so why not just skip the whole election? It can make sense. It's not ridiculous. But on the other hand, another nice thing about it is that recommender systems researchers are good at modeling things and learning from data and basically predicting the results of processes. And you'll find some very sophisticated models or reasonably sophisticated models in the literature where people actually predict the outcomes of things like social influence and conformity and emotional contagion and the like, and then say this is going to be the result of that decision. And then they recommend that. But on the other hand, as this example here shows, what if what you predict will happen is undesirable, right? You predict that there will be a lot of conformity, groupthink, risky decision-making and the like. Would you really want to recommend that just because you think it would happen anyway? And even if the processes that you anticipate are desirable, that doesn't actually mean that it's just as well to skip the interaction. Right, for example, if a lone expert is able to convince the less knowledgeable group members that Giovanni's Pizzeria is the best one, it's better if he actually does it, right? That way, when they go to the pizzeria, they'll know this is the best pizzeria in town. If it doesn't taste quite as good as they like, they'll at least know why they're going there and not someone else. So just skipping the interaction is not such a great substitute in general. Also, it often just simply doesn't work all that well. If you look at the literature, you see that these systems that use this approach, they don't really work that great. Sometimes they sort of seem to work because they choose sort of a straw man to compare their methods with. But if you look at it closely, it doesn't work all that great. So frankly, as you can see, I'm not really all that positive about this approach. It is sort of tempting, and you'll see a lot of it in the literature. Judge for yourself. In the handbook chapter, you'll see examples of both approaches, but it is at least important to distinguish between them. Okay, so again, sorry this isn't turning out as interactive as I hoped, but let's consider now finally what principles can we apply to make that we can derive from these areas of research. And I guess in terms of timing, I'll have time to touch on each one for about a minute or so. Oh, by the way, let me ask the organizers for a moment. Are we going to stick to, what time would you like me to finish the presentation?
So it should be 55, so 15:55. So you still have 11 minutes.
Good. Let's see if we can get some time for discussion. Otherwise, I will eagerly look at the chats once we're done. And as I say, take into account what you say when finalizing the slides this afternoon. Okay, what do we mean by support knowledge exchange? Okay, all that work on group dynamic, group decision making that I mentioned earlier in laboratories often yielded the result that often people just talk about the things that everybody knows. So, for example, this guy knows A and B, this lady knows A and C, she knows A and D, etc. And the only thing that they all know is A, and that's what they talk about. You would actually hope that people would volunteer the information that they have that is unique to them, but in fact, they tend to keep it to themselves. Now, that's a complex phenomenon. It depends on all sorts of different variables, but it is sort of a general tendency. So you can say that even though a benefit of group decision-making is the availability of a broad range of relevant knowledge, these people they do know different things. Unfortunately, it's not shared as much as it would be useful. It's sort of a bias against sharing it. And what that means is that a recommender system can help by encouraging the sharing of knowledge. And there's various ways to do that. You can encourage people with a certain expertise to contribute at a given point, or you can sort of search through previously recorded contributions and fish out the most relevant ones so they at least don't get forgotten if they were mentioned at some point. Or you can even suggest options that are likely to stimulate people to mention what they know. So this is an interesting challenge for recommender systems, which derives from this principle. Okay, another general principle is it's important to attend to underlying interest. Here's a classic negotiation story that some of you may be familiar with. Alice and Bob are arguing over who's to get the orange. Right, their positions are Alice wants to have the orange, Bob wants to have the orange. Now, if you only knew what they really wanted, you would see that Bob wants to squeeze some orange juice, and Alice actually wants to make some orange marmalade. So that means that they actually have quite different interests, and we'll get back to that point in a moment to see the implications. But certainly the situation looks different if you know what their underlying interests are and not just their positions. So it's often easier to understand, resolve conflicts if you know the underlying interests, and recommender systems can help to surface interests in various different ways. With a bit of imagination, you can see that recommender systems ought to be pretty good at either figuring out what people's underlying interests are or encouraging them to express them. Okay, principle number 3, use shared representations. That's here, this is an example from a system that Alex was involved in, a requirements decision for deciding on requirements. For example, how important is it to include PDF generation in our application? And here you can get an overview of how the utility of this feature has been rated by different people. And this is basically a representation which gets everybody on the same page in thinking about the decision problem. And they have different types of value. They remind people of what the shared knowledge, express interest, the current state of the decision-making process, agreed upon decision procedures. Not all of these are visible in this one example. And more importantly, maybe they encourage the framing of the process as a collaborative effort to reach agreement. So instead of going in there saying, I'm going to persuade everybody else to adopt my point of view, people go and get the idea, we are all working on building up this representation of the problem so that it represents a good solution. So these are valuable things, and there are plenty of examples of that in the literature. Okay, again, getting back to Alice and Bob, they can illustrate the principle of look for win-win solutions, right? So given that, Bob just wants the orange juice, all he needs is the orange, and Alice just needs the peel to make her marmalade. So actually each of them can have exactly what they want, and there's no need to compromise, right? If you didn't know what their interests were and you didn't look for a win-win solution, you would cut the orange in half, and each of them would be able to have only half as much. Now, of course, reality isn't usually that nice and simple, but very often you can find win-win solutions which are much better than just splitting the pie in half there, okay. And in fact, research and practice on integrative negotiation has yielded a wealth of strategies and tactics. So you don't have to rely on common sense here, but you can use systematic methods for trying to unearth win-win solutions. So yes, and doing that often requires expanding the space of options. For example, probably at the beginning, neither of them thought of the possibility of dividing the orange into the inside and the skin. And very often you have to expand the design space of options, which may require human intelligence. So you're going to have to probably involve the humans in this process of looking for a win-win solution, but still the recommender system can support it in various ways. And you certainly wouldn't leave it out in any case, right? You wouldn't want to design the recommender systems to preclude the possibility of dreaming up win-win solutions, say by starting with a fixed number of options and not allowing any new ones to be considered. Okay, another thing, principle is to get buy-in on decision procedures. That's why I asked you a few minutes ago if you agree on our procedure for deciding about these issues. Okay, here, look at this cartoon. It's actually supposed to be a joke. This guy's flipping a coin and it says they used a scientific method to decide which new product idea to pursue. That's supposed to be a joke, but actually it makes a lot of sense. Suppose these guys have been arguing for weeks about which product idea to pursue and they can't agree. Then they might just say, hey, why don't we agree? We'll flip a coin, and then whichever idea wins, we're going to pursue that idea together, right? It makes a lot of sense. In fact, suppose this guy here is going to lose, and maybe he'll be disappointed that his idea wasn't chosen, but he'll still accept the solution because he agreed to flip the coin. Right, so it's actually quite a powerful notion. It can also be applied to things like agreeing on decision rules. How much consensus should we require for the final decision? Unanimous, 2/3 majority, simple, team leader decides. It's important to decide this in advance, right? If you just reach the point of making a final decision and you haven't agreed in advance on what the rule is going to be, then of course, people are going to favor whatever rule works out for best for them at the last minute. But if you decided right from the start what procedure to choose, then even the people who end up with the short end of the stick will be reasonably satisfied because they bought into the decision procedure. So the general point is that satisfaction it can depend as much on the agreement with the procedure than it does on the outcome itself. And there's a lot of improvement that's possible because most recommender systems simply use some decision procedure. They don't explain it or justify it. It's just there. And consequently, they're not benefiting from this process of buy-in. The recommender systems could, explain and justify the procedures in advance, or even offer alternative procedures to choose from, or use recommendation technologies to recommend particular procedures. There's plenty that can be done in this area. Okay, two more before we're, okay, another thing is you probably experienced with face-to-face meetings unsupported that you often have interpersonal problems, right? Group members differ in their interests. They may think that each other's ideas are stupid. Or they may have different communication styles. One person will say, why is he talking all the time? Why doesn't he shut up, and that sort of thing. And then you get this sort of situation. And it's too bad because much of this friction is avoidable if you just structure the interaction better. That's one thing that facilitators do, is they try to avoid this sort of thing by structuring the interaction and politely asking everybody for their opinion, things like that. And in fact, recommender systems can do that as well. This is the same system that I showed a couple of minutes ago, the one that Alex was involved in for the requirement evaluation. Here you see some discussion of PDF generation, and we have 2 positive comments, 1 negative. Okay, and you see, and the interaction is sort of structured. So Alex P isn't crazy about PDF generation. He says more important features should be completed first. This is huge effort, but at least that's better than him screaming at the other people. And in fact, you could even structure it even more so that he can sort of choose from various polite formulations to express his objection. So the recommender systems can help ensure that you avoid unnecessarily interpersonal problems. Okay. And the final, maybe the least obvious point of all concerns non-participation. There's this concept in the negotiation literature of the BATNA, which is the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And here's a typical example of that is, let's suppose that this lady has been arguing for a higher salary with her bosses. And she's always known, well, Facebook made me a very nice offer. If they don't give me what I want, I'm just going to walk out and go to Facebook. And apparently she's doing that now. So Facebook was her BATNA, and she's apparently happy with it. And that certainly affected the way she negotiated. She probably didn't make too many concessions, knowing that she could easily walk away. So BATNAs are very important in negotiation, and they haven't received much attention in the group recommender systems literature. But the group members' BATNA can strongly determine their contribution to the group decision. And a lot of is known about how to deal with them, right? They teach that stuff at business school. And there's actually a specific tactic that's especially interesting for group recommender systems that was explored by Herzog and Brundle in a recent paper. For example, let's suppose that Alice and Bob and Carol are walking through Munich, and Bob and Carol would like to visit these two cool museums, Pinakothek der Moderne and Museum Brandhorst. And Alice isn't such a museum fan, so she just preferred to stay outside. Okay, now if the recommender system tried to find some route that would be acceptable to all of them, it would maybe do something like cut the museum visit in half or something, and which wouldn't really satisfy anyone. But in fact, this recommender system is flexible enough to allow so-called splitting. So it says, all right, Alice, why don't you go to this garden here and relax while they're in the museum, and then you can join up later. And yeah, it worked out quite well. And it makes sense. So in other words, you should always consider that the group isn't necessarily fixed. You can split it up, or some people may just want to leave it. And it's certainly not something you would want to just ignore. Right? It's maybe a controversial technique in some contexts, but it's certainly worth considering. Okay, one last slide just to summarize. What have we decided on today? Again, this interaction, because of the confusion at the beginning, wasn't anywhere near as interactive as I would have liked, but we have looked at what areas of social science research and practice we need to know about, what overall approach we should take, supporting interaction versus predicting interaction, and what key principles derived from this knowledge we should focus on. Of course, I hope that this talk has motivated you to look more closely into these issues. In the handbook chapter, you'll see all sorts, hundreds of references. In Alex's book, a great deal more information. And now maybe, let's see if the leaders of the discussion think there's time for some immediate feedback, or otherwise I'll just process the chat feedback.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. It was amazing. I just have a quick question. If you don't mind, can you come back to the previous slide, please? Yes. Okay, here you mentioned that the recommender system is able to make different decisions, split the decisions. Am I right? How do you train your recommender system? In fact, do you provide a ground truth for the system to say such decisions are alternative and such decisions are separatable?
Okay, I should say this is Herzog and Brundle and not Jameson. So I frankly don't know the details of their algorithm. The important thing for us is that they were one of the first people to make it even possible, right? Because most group recommender systems say we have some options and there's some group members and they're fixed, especially the group members are fixed. That was the key idea. Exactly how they do it and how otherwise it must be done, I must admit I have to pass. The paper is, of course, cited in our chapter, and they have nice graphics explaining the algorithms. So,
okay, thank you so much. I will check that for sure. Thank you for the presentation.
So surely there are some objections. I love objections, right? If someone comes up with a halfway reasonable objection, but
no, but the question. So,
oh,
I think you mentioned this in your talk. So this aspect of counteracting biases in recommender systems seems to be a really relevant one. So, what is your recommendation in terms of specific research issues?
So are you referring to bias in recommender systems themselves, or are you referring to recommender systems counteracting human biases?
Yeah, to make it short, so you are in a group decision scenario. The overall goal should be to optimize the decision, but the recommender system is aware that something is going wrong in the group. So the recommender system should help to counteract in one way or another. And my question is, any specific recommendations on specific related research topics from your side?
Yeah, well, actually, it basically concerns this general distinction between, are we going to support interaction or just predict it, right? Predict it, you basically take what would normally happen without computer support as being okay, and you just want to sort of skip it so that you can jump right to the result. And the business of supporting interaction, there's no single technique. It basically requires all of the knowledge that we have about things that can go wrong and how to counteract them. Essentially, all of the principles I mentioned, all of the procedures that tend to be used, say, by group decision support system, all of those can be seen as avoiding sort of bad things from happening in decision processes. Whether it's inefficient procedures or overlooking options or arguments or whatever. So the answer is basically everything that we talk about has the goal of improving decision-making processes rather than just predicting them. Is that an adequate answer to your question?
Yeah.
I think it would be a bit arbitrary to pick out any one technique and say that is what really counteracts inadequacies in decision processes, because there's so many things. And
okay, so further questions?
Yeah, it was a great talk. Thank you very much. Very inspiring. I was wondering what your ideas are about evaluation in the context of all these topics. Yeah. So is it, because it means the groups are composed very differently, so people might have very different perspectives on the quality of decision. So do we need a different approach to evaluation in your point of view as well?
Yeah, actually, it's good you mentioned that, because here, if we look at this second approach, for example, here evaluation is a lot easier. You're trying to predict what would happen. So evaluation basically consists of, you need some studies to collect data on what actually happens in these decision-making settings, including more everyday ones. And then, of course, you see how well the algorithms predict them given reasonable input data, and then you can compare them. And there are quite a few studies of that sort. Some of them are cited in the book. As I mentioned, even these studies are not that easy, right? Even this sort of relatively easy evaluation is tricky because it's often, for example, hard to know what a reasonable baseline method is. So that's difficult enough. But as I suppose you were indicating, with this sort of approach here, where you're supporting interaction, evaluation really becomes almost a Pandora's box, because there's so many things. But I suppose that one thing that your system does is recommend decision procedures, such as decision rules. Then you would have to evaluate that, where it does a good job of that. Another thing that it tries to do is prevent people from getting mad and insulting each other. Okay, that's a quite different sort of thing. So essentially, it becomes in this paradigm here, that is recommender system or support system, becomes multifaceted, doing all sorts of different things, which in principle all have to be evaluated individually. Of course, you could do something like evaluate the overall satisfaction with a total result. But then you would be evaluating the sum of maybe a dozen different features that you put into the recommender system. So it is more complicated in this case. This approach is more complicated, both in terms of realization and in terms of evaluation.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Okay, we started a little bit late, but I think if there are still further questions, so we can pose those questions. Are there further questions?
Okay, if you think of anything else, I said, as soon as I get off of this presenter mode, I'll look at the chat and try to respond to anything that you write there, including starting now. So don't hesitate. Also, get in touch anytime. I always love talking about these things, also one-on-one. So I hope that this isn't the last time we'll have a chance to communicate about these things. And for now, I thank you for putting up with this somewhat one-sided presentation, and looking forward to seeing the rest of the workshop.
So thank you very much, Tony, for this very inspiring talk. And I think that there are plenty of research topics one could work on in this area. So again, many thanks for the presentation. And I think we have to move on and go to the first session, which is on cognitive factors. And the first paper is about the immunity of users' item selection from serial position effects in a very specific context. And the presentation in this context, I know it is given by Trang Tran from Graz University of Technology, TU Graz. So Trang, it's your turn.
Yeah, thank you for your introduction. So I would like to share my screen.
Tony,
I think I cannot share the screen because it say that they can.
Yeah, Tony should stop sharing. Then the next speaker could share.
Okay, let me see if I figure it out.
Everyone can share among the participants.
It's down below, like in this, where the little icons are.
No.
Okay, maybe. Why don't I'll leave the meeting and come back in a minute if you don't mind. That's probably the easiest way to do it. All right. Okay. I don't want to keep.
Okay, I'll do it. Don't worry. Okay.
Okay, I think
I'm the boss. All right.
Sorry, I have some issue. I think I need to make some setting.
No, they share the screen. That's it. That should be the button.
So sorry, there's some setting in my computer that I have to.
Yeah, okay.
Cannot share. Huh? I'm sorry, I have to quit the Zoom for a while because I'm just make some changes in my setting and.
Don't worry.
Okay.
But you're still in Zoom. Actually, I think you're sharing your screen.
Yes, yeah. I'm still, but if I need
that means you're in Zoom. Because if you cannot share if you're not in Zoom. Would you like me to stop your sharing?
Is this still sharing?
No, I stop your sharing, right? Just
okay. So I just
for you to change the settings.
So should we? I think it's
okay. So I can share it now. I think can you see my screen now?
Excellent.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for a technical issue. So hello everyone. Trang from Graz University of Technology. It is my pleasure to be here and present our work on the immunities of user item selection from serial position effect in multi-attribute item recommendation scenarios. So this work was done together with Professor Velvenik and my colleagues Viet Mạnh Lê and our bachelor student from Carmen Isabella Baumann from Graz University of Technology. Serial position effects are also known as primacy recency effect, describing psychological phenomenon where a user tends to recall items shown at the beginning and the end of the list more often than those shown in the middle. So actually this effect has already been exploited to create better user interfaces in different recommended systems. So for instance, in e-learning recommended system, question answered wrongly by the learner in the previous section will be shown at the beginning or at the end of the list in order to increase the probability of being accessed by the learner in the upcoming training sections. Or in e-commerce applications, this has already been applied by many famous companies like Apple or Nike in order to increase the frequencies of accessing important information or item. The current literature have witnessed different or plenty of study on serial position effects, but most of them focus on investigating serial position effects for no attribute item domains. So, however, it's still unclear up to now if serial position effect have some impact in the context of multi-attribute item domains. So multi-attribute item domain actually consists of item described by a list of different features. So for instance, a camera can be described by different features such as zoom, image resolution, video, weight, and so on. So we confronted a recommendation scenario where a user want to choose a camera. And in this context, the user has already specified his or her requirements for the desired camera. And based on this requirement, the system has recommended a list of different cameras alternative to be selected by the user. So in this scenario, we are interested in examining if different order of the attribute of the recommended camera trigger different choices of the user in terms of recommended cameras. Therefore, the main focus of this paper is to answer the following research question. Does the order of the attributes with regard to the recommended items affect the item selections of users? So why do we need to answer this question? Answering this question helps to figure out if serial position effect do exist in the context of multi-attribute item recommendation scenario. And if this is the case, then serial position effects can be exploited to create a position nudging which provides ease and convenience for item selection of user and therefore speed up decision-making process. And finally, it also helps to find a solution to counteract serial position effects. In order to answer this research question, we propose two recommendation scenarios corresponding to two item domains. So we choose Airbnb room as a low involvement item domains, where the user just want to book a room for a very short trip and he or she doesn't need to pay much money. And therefore, the user might not spend too much effort on making such a decision. In the contrary, we propose high involvement item domain. In this case, to select a digital camera for the user job. And this is very important because the user needs to choose the camera which is optimal for his job, and he might pay a lot of money. And therefore, this is might cost more effort. In order to investigate the serial position effect, we have to think about how we could present the list of recommended items with different order of the variants. So the question arising here is how we could order the variants, the attribute of the recommended items. So inspired by the work of Warren and Ant, where they mentioned that one of the motion ways to investigate serial position effects is to show familiar attributes at the beginning or at the end of the list. So based on this idea, we propose for each recommendation scenario, we propose two variants. In the first variant, we show the familiar attribute at the beginning and at the end of the list, and the remaining unfamiliar attribute in the middle, and another way around for variant 2. In order to avoid potential biases, in each part of the list, we show the attribute to the participant in a random fashion. Furthermore, we wanted to analyze serial position effect with the different numbers of attributes. So therefore, we proposed 2 addition variants, variant 3 and variant 4, with the same structure as the variant 1 and 2. However, the numbers of attributes are larger. So we have 10 attributes for variants 1 and 2, and 15 attributes for variant 3 and 4. We conducted a user study, an online user study with 198 participants from 18 to 25 years old who were students in our courses. And the user study were conducted using the between subject method, meaning that each participant received exactly 1 recommendation scenario and 1 variant of attribute ordering. Besides, we conducted an eye tracking user study where we invited 20 participants to visit our institute and conduct the user study directly in our computer with eye tracking devices. So this study helped us to further analyze how the user analyze the attribute when they make a item selection. So we collected the data after the user study and performed some analysis. So in our research, we conduct the cross-tabulation analysis and then ran a chi-square test in order to investigate if there are any relationship between item selection of the user and the order of the attribute. So the results have shown that no correlation between item selection of the participant and the order of the attribute was found. In order to further analyze the behavior of the item selection of user, we have a look at the data set from eye tracking user study, and we saw that participants more focus on analyzing the attribute mentioned in the recommendation scenario, regardless of how the order was shown to them. So this brings us to the conclusion that serial position effects are not triggered in the context of multi-attribute item recommendation scenarios. And this is somehow going against what have been announced in previous study. And this also helped us to find a solution to counteract the influences of serial position effect. With this conclusion, we found a way to represent recommended item. If the recommended item are presented in the form of the list of the attribute, then the item selection of user is immune to the serial position effect. Our work shows some limitation, especially the small, especially for the small size of participant. So actually we have on an average 25 to 30 participants for each variant. And also there was a lot of difference between between male and female participant. Because it was conducted in computer science courses, and of course, you know, this unequal between male and female. For future work, we will conduct the user study with higher numbers of participants to increase the representativeness of the sample, and with the more equivalent between male and female participants. We also conduct the user study for further domains ranging from low involvement item domain and high involvement item domains in order to achieve sufficient result in terms of item domain perspective. So I am now at the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So are there questions? So I have one. So what do you think in terms of the number of attributes that are used? For example, do you think you have to evaluate more different settings with more attributes, less attributes, or do you think it's the result is already stable with regard to the number of attributes?
Yes, actually, we also wanted to analyze with different numbers of attributes as well. We assume that if with different numbers of attributes, the serial position effects could have different influences on the item selection, might be. So in our user study, we already try with two different numbers of attribute, 10 and 15. And that's could be another point that we will take into account in the future work, that we might conduct the user study with maybe higher numbers of attribute or lower number, like 5 attribute or 20 attribute, in order to provide sufficient result in terms of the influence of serial position effects.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hi. Thanks very much. Fascinating idea. Great work. I was wondering how much you think that the sort of list presentation of the attributes and the real estate and the I'm sorry, I'm not phrasing this entirely well. The presentation of the attributes has an effect here. The way it's laid out, there's quite a lot of reading to do in the grid for each of the items in this kind of layout, as opposed to, let's say, if you took something more like a YouTube layout, but sort of added a few attributes or some characteristics to each of the items listed, or say a song selection. How much do you think sort of the space given to the information affects the serial presentation effects here?
Yeah, I think what we wanted to show is this the presentation in a grid, where we want to show the attribute in the list, and also the cameras or items in the columns. And this is also the presentation we have looked at in some web pages. So one of them, sorry, I don't remember exactly the name, the link now, but this is somehow what we have observed from other e-commerce pages, and what we wanted to know in this present representation of recommended item, how good the attribute would have some influences in the item selection of user, but maybe other view could have different influences. So this might be a good point for us for future work, that we will think about if other representation of a recommended item might have some impact in the item selection of user.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the presentation. Again, I think it's now time to start with the second talk of this session. And the title of this talk is, how does the user's knowledge of the recommender influence their behavior? So I do not know exactly who will be the presenter, but I'm very curious about the presentation. So it's your turn.
Hi.
Hi.
1 second. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. My name is Muhi Fazan. I'm a PhD student at DePaul University. Today, I'll be presenting my research on understanding user behavior of the recommender system. So research at the intersection of recommender systems and human-computer interaction have shown that users possess a mental model of the recommender system. So mental models are internal representations of technological systems. They represent the user's knowledge and beliefs about how the system works, which in turn allows them to understand, reason, and predict their behavior. In general, these models are formulated through observations and repeated interactions with the target system. So for example, a mental model of a recommender system may include the user's understanding of how the system works, how recommendations are generated, what data is used, the different goals and motivations of the system, and so on. But usually the mental models that users hold are often inaccurate, incomplete, or inconsistent. And in order to successfully predict a system's behavior, these models must be accurate and consistent with the system's actual behavior. So in this research, we explore the relationship between the user's knowledge of the recommender system and their online behavior. We propose that a mature understanding of the recommender system may influence how users choose to interact with it. So in this case, users may indirectly alter or manipulate the feedback that the system receives. So imagine a user who is currently unhappy with his current set of recommendations. The user may purposely rate items high or low to modify their recommendations. Other users may delete user interaction data so as not to allow the system from using this data to recommend new items. Other users who are sensitive to privacy concerns, they may use applications in incognito mode. So these unconventional behaviors may impact recommendation performance. So our goal in this research is to identify and investigate the various factors that may influence or inform user behavior of the recommender system. So in order to understand user behavior of the recommender system, we use a theory of planned behavior. Theory of planned behavior believes that human behavior is the result of a well thought out plan. So in this case, the behavior is jointly driven by intentions and perceived behavioral control. So intentions, they represent the person's motivation to engage in a particular behavior. It is influenced by attitude and perceived behavioral control. Attitude in turn represents the individual's overall evaluation of the particular behavior. And perceived behavioral control refers to the user's perception of control over their behaviors. So in this research, we adapt the conceptual framework of the theory of planned behavior, and we conduct initial exploratory interviews with the recruited subjects to identify the relevant factors that might influence user behavior. So based on the insights obtained from the initial exploratory interviews, we examine how users' knowledge of the recommender system, user attitudes and intentions inform user behavior. So in total, we conducted semi-structured open-ended interviews with a sample of 40 recommender system users. The interview questions were designed to examine the user's knowledge of how recommender systems work and investigate their behavior. The questions included what is a recommender system, how does it build recommendations? We asked users to describe the goals and motivations of the system. We specifically asked users to explain the recommender system's reasoning behind the various recommendations they receive on their recommendation feed. We also asked participants to describe their interaction in detail. We then used thematic analysis to analyze the interview data. Thematic analysis is a well-established research method. So in this method, we use the 6-phase approach to thematic analysis as specified by Brown and Clark. So in this method, the data is analyzed systematically to identify initial codes. We then group similar codes into categories known as themes. So these themes, they represent meaningful patterns from the data and capture important insights. And finally, we condensed these themes into high-level themes and validated them. And in the last phase, we developed a thematic map that gives us a visual description of the various factors that influence user behavior. So here in this thematic map, we have 5 total main themes. So the themes: attitude, perceived reasoning for recommendations, perceived behavioral control, and perceived outcome inform user behavior. And the squares with the light gray color represents the sub-themes. So in the coming slides, I'll try to explain these themes and sub-themes in detail. Here, attitude refers to the user's overall impression towards the recommender systems. So in general, attitudes vary based on several factors. So based on our analysis, we found that user attitudes varied depending on the nature of the recommendations they received, the utility the users derived from using the application, the overall experience of interacting with the system. So attitude is divided into 4 sub-themes. Positive. So this, in general, a majority of the users held a positive attitude toward the system. Users describe the system using the terms helpful, useful, and convenient. They mentioned that the system helps them find items that they're looking for, discover new content that they have not seen before, and offer a variety of options while saving them time and effort. And on the other hand, some participants held a negative attitude toward the system. The reasons described where these users expressed frustration with regards to advertisements and sponsored content. They were also concerned regarding their privacy. Next, some users had a neutral stance on the subject. These users knew about the advantages and drawbacks of using a recommender system, but they did not care. So typically we observe that users who held a neutral stance towards the recommender system, they spend less time using applications than the average user. We also observed that a few participants were uncertain or indecisive on their stance towards recommender systems. They expressed both positive and negative impressions. The next theme is perceived reasoning for recommendations. So this theme represents the user's overall knowledge of the recommender system and how it works. So participants usually described recommendations using the terms useful, interesting, relevant, somewhat relevant, irrelevant, and annoying. So we specifically asked participants to explain the recommender system's reasoning as to why they regarded some of the recommendations as irrelevant or annoying. We asked them to explain why the system recommended that items which they obviously found irrelevant. So most of the participants, a majority of the users mentioned that the recommendations were similar to the items they've watched, browsed, or purchased in the past. They explained that the system picked item features from this data to recommend new items. But these recommendations were not necessarily aligned to their actual preferences. So other users also mentioned similar demographics and other similar users. They explained that the system finds similar users based on interests, common interests, and recommends items that they have liked in the past. But these recommendations did not necessarily align with their preferences. So these responses show that users have a general understanding of the recommendation algorithms like content-based filtering and collaborative filtering, even though they do not know the specifics or the technicality of the recommendation algorithms. These responses show that users have a general understanding of the different recommendation algorithms. Next, we have casual browsing and accidental interaction. Some users, they mentioned that they would like to casually browse the various applications, and the system would track their activity and use this data to recommend them items which they are not actually interested in. Other users find popular or trending recommendations irrelevant. Some users also mentioned that their preferences have changed over time, or they are not currently in a mood to watch, let's say, a romantic movie at the moment. Other users who share account with other family members, they mentioned that some of the recommendations that they found irrelevant are due to mixed preferences with other family members using the same account. We also observed that users were able to distinguish between recommendations and advertisements or promoted content. Next, insufficient data on users. Some users explained that the system probably does not have sufficient interaction data to recommend items, and the recommendation that they are currently receiving would not align with their actual preferences, and that the recommendations would improve over time the more they use the applications. So all these sub-themes show that users have a sophisticated knowledge of how recommender systems work and the different goals and motivations of the recommender system. So then the next sub-theme, we have user behavior. So this theme shows how users interact with the recommender system. For this theme, we asked users to explain or describe how they would respond to recommendations which are irrelevant, or recommendations that they received that do not align well with their actual preferences. A majority of the users mentioned that they just ignore or hide the recommendations that that they find irrelevant. Other users mentioned that they refresh the web page to get a new set of recommendations. Some users, they mentioned that they try to provide feedback to the system. They provide feedback by either upvoting or downvoting videos that they like or dislike. They either try to rate items by filling out surveys or creating a music playlist. So these they explained that these actions would allow the recommender system to realize their actual preferences and hopefully recommend them good recommendations. On the other hand, some participants also mentioned actively searching for items, clicking on items, or adding, removing items from a playlist, or changing the preference profile to actively send interactive signals to the recommender system to improve their recommendations. So this sub-theme is different from the previous sub-theme in that the user is actively spending a session in order with an aim to improve his or her recommendations. Next, we have some users also mentioned that they try to limit their interaction with the application, stating that through these casual interactions, the system would recommend them random items or random videos in a video streaming service. Other users mentioned that they try to use a different account. Some users mentioned that they use 2 accounts, and they leave one account passive for a while, and it would help get rid of irrelevant recommendations. And other users mentioned that they unsubscribe to certain channels or artists to avoid receiving recommendations from those channels. We also observed that some users delete their interaction data on the platform. This interaction data includes their browsing history, search history, or purchase history. So they describe that deleting this information would help avoid irrelevant recommendations. Some users also mentioned disabling data collection features. So some users who are sensitive to privacy concerns, they mentioned that they do not like their data being used to recommend advertisements or sponsored content. And they usually go ahead and disable data collection features. So the next theme is perceived behavioral control. So this theme refers to the user's perception of control over their behaviors. So some users, they mentioned that they would like to use the available system features such as rating items or upvoting or downvoting videos, filling out surveys in order to provide feedback to the system to correct the recommendations. Other users mentioned unconventional methods. These methods include disabling data collection features, or deleting user activity data, or actively interacting with items of interest or limiting interactions in order to improve their profile, improve their recommendations. And the last theme we have is perceived outcome. So when we asked users about their expected outcome of these behaviors, they mentioned that in carrying out these behaviors, they expect to personalize their own recommendation feed, or improve their recommendations, or avoid irrelevant recommendations, or preserve their privacy. So in this research, we identified and investigated the various factors that inform or influence the user behavior of the recommender system. So our research contributes to a refined understanding of user behavior, and the study provides subjective evidence that some unconventional user behavior may be detrimental to the recommendation performance. And through this research, we would like to establish the link between the user's mental model of the recommender system and their online behavior. So we suggest the use of explanations to help users fully comprehend and understand the results or the functionality of their feedback functions. We also suggest implementing controllable interfaces to allow users to revise their preferences in an easy and intuitive manner. For future work, we plan to develop a theoretical framework of the user's mental model of the recommender system. And we also plan to experimentally evaluate the impact of these unconventional user behaviors on a real-world datasets by simulating these behaviors. For your time, any questions or feedback would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah,
so
yeah, sorry.
Thank you very much. So, other questions?
Yeah. Yeah, so I would have a question. I mean, so this is so there's like really fascinating findings in your presentation and also in your paper, but I have two questions more or less. So first, so I think you recruited your user base in Reddit, right? And you describe in your paper that those people are kind of the tech savvy ones. So how do you think these findings about that users seem to be quite knowledgeable about the recommender systems, how do they translate to like a more generic population? That's the first question. And you mean, so since apparently some parts of users are so familiar with the internal workings of a recommender system, so what does it mean for the field of explanations? So what is it then really that we should explain to the user?
That's a very good question. The main reason for recruiting participants from Reddit was due to the COVID scenario, but I understand that a tech-savvy sample may not be representative of a more generalizable population. But I think not every participant that we recruited were tech savvy, but we also had, I mean, let's see, okay. We had participants from diverse education backgrounds and occupations. So we had participants who held high school degree or bachelor's degree. And we had participants whose occupations were sales representative, bakers, or housewives or teachers. So I think the sample is representative to some extent, but in the future work we would like to recruit a more diverse and representative sample of users.
Okay, further questions? There was the second part, which was related to explanations. I don't know if you want to answer that.
Yeah, I have a related question before this answer. So the knowledge kind of affecting the user behavior, but how much is good and how much is actually becoming not good? Do you have any idea? Is there a like sweet spot? If you know too little about how recommender system work, it's not good. If you know too much, it's not good either, right? So far, it's clearly that knowledge are important, right? But it's not really clear the details of the process. Do you have some insights about that? And that's related to the issue of the explanations, because it affects the kind of explanation which we give. If we need to get your refined knowledge, should be really detailed explanation, what, and how. If you need to get ballpark understanding, the explanation might be quite fuzzy. I mean, not fuzzy, but not really going down to the details, which might be a challenge to neural network-based recommenders, which are almost impossible to explain. You just need to justify.
Yeah, correct. That's a very good question. So during our analysis, we observed that some of the participants, they didn't really understand what liking a particular video would do. So they mentioned that in particular, one subject mentioned that she just mentioned that as long as I watch videos, the system would recommend me new videos. I didn't know that liking a video would enable me to receive similar recommendations. And on the other hand, we have users who actively, let's say a user who likes science fiction movies and dislike romantic movies, the user would go ahead and downvote all romantic movies to receive science fiction recommendations. So I think there is certainly a need to balance this by explaining users who lack knowledge, by educating them what the functionality of the feedback functions are, and also educating users who misuse these feedback functions, that these actions would probably hinder their recommendations or disprove their recommendations. I think that is something for the future work.
Okay, I think we have time for one further question. So maybe I have one, it's a rather short one. So what do you think about domain dependence? So you evaluate these things in a general fashion, but do you see a potential that the results could be quite different depending on the domain where the recommender is applied?
So for our study, we asked users to explain how they interact with recommendations, and also cite examples by mentioning the particular application in question. The results so far are general, but I mean, if we can do a more focused study, we can have results that are specific in particular to that specific application, I guess.
Okay, so yeah, further question.
if there's time just for one remark, there's an interesting analogy to group recommender systems, because one of the things you're saying is that people are often acting in sort of an insincere way. That is, they'll download 10 science fiction movies just to make a point, even though they have no intention of watching those movies, right? So they're essentially gaming the system, doing something that they don't really mean, just in order to get a particular result. And with group recommenders, people sometimes do that as well. For example, if they're, say, 2 movies and you actually sort of like both of them, but you like movie A a bit better than movie B, then you might rate movie B as terrible to increase the likelihood that movie A will come out as the winner in the voting, right? It's called sort of manipulation or insincere specification of preference or whatever. And it's an analogous thing. And the approach they take there are partly to come up with, one thing you can do is try to leave people in the dark so they don't know enough about the voting mechanism to manipulate it. But you have to know that calling B terrible is going to have the desired effect. Or another thing is to design a mechanism which is such that you can't manipulate it, making it sort of manipulation proof. So it could be interesting to look into both of those options as a way of dealing with the problems that you mentioned, which really represent an interesting challenge.
So maybe another comment to that, because it's an interesting perspective. But I mean, so I think so. There were some users who were concerned about privacy, and who said that, okay, I might use a different account, or I might not let the algorithm collect my data. So those users might be interested in a kind of option to manipulate the system, so that the system does not know so much about it. So that's then another aspect of that, yeah.
Yeah, that's certainly interesting. Yeah, I think I'll take a look into it more.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for your feedback and suggestions.
Thank you again for the presentation. I think it's time to close the session now. The next session starts in around 49 minutes. And the session chair of the next session is Elisabeth Lex, and the topic of the session is conversational recommender systems and interfaces. So see you in around 39 minutes. So
okay, by the way, if I can interrupt, you can download the chapter. It's in the chat. I don't know if the chat will still be there. I'll put it back up again, but it might be a good time to do that. Just find the chat in your window and just click on the link.
Sure. But I guess all the account would just be running, so we will not lose any kind of comments in the chat.
Okay.
Okay, then.
Enjoy the break.
See you after the break. So I suggest we wait a couple more minutes.
Okay,
until
no problem.
people are back. But if you want to share like the first slide of your presentation already, then please go ahead.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yes, but I think we see the presentation mode.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Let me check.
So we see the notes.
Okay.
Maybe while we're waiting, for those of you who are here, I put all the materials for my talk, the preprint and also the slides into the chat window, so you can just download them from there.
Thank you so much.
I assume you can find the chat window.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to share my screen, but it doesn't work for Zoom. We usually use the Microsoft Teams. I will try it once again. Just 1 minute.
Yeah, so maybe you open it on presentation mode on your laptop or whatever, and then you can select the window. Yeah, it's still the presenters mode, I think, that we see.
Okay.
Not sure if that's what you had in mind showing it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, but maybe in the meantime, we can start with the introduction of the session too. So welcome everybody to the second session of our workshop. We had some interesting discussions in the last session, so I hope for discussions also in the second session. We have two presentations. One is about conversational recommender systems and how an enriched interaction technique using mixed modality elements perform in such a setting. And then we have a, now it works, just can tell you this. And then we have a second presentation on a visualization on an interface that allows to control personalized recommendations. And the first talk, which is now ready, I think, is mixed modality interaction in conversational recommender systems. And please excuse me because I'm likely pronouncing your name incorrectly. It's Yuan Ma.
Yeah, genau. You're right.
Yeah. But we're happy to have you.
Okay.
So I think you can start your presentation now.
Okay. Thanks for introduction, and hello everyone. I'm Yuan. Today I'm going to present our paper Mixed Modality Interaction in Conversational Recommender System, which cooperate with Tim Kleeman and Professor Jürgen Ziegler. This presentation consists of 4 parts. The first is the introduction of the Conversational Recommender System, also CRS. The second is about mixed modality interactions. Third is experiment part, which includes experiment setting and procedures. The last part is about limitations and future work. Now let's go to the conversational recommender system part. Recommender system has become an indispensable part of our lives because we live in an era of data exploration. We don't have opportunity to browse all the information. Recommender system can provide the most interesting products for us, but current recommender system is data-driven, which means before it can work correctly, we need a lot of data for training. Otherwise, recommender system has no idea about user preference and is not able to provide high quality recommended items. This problem is also called cold start problem. In community, there are many studies dedicated to solve this kind of cold start problem. One popular direction is combining recommender system with dialogue system to be conversational recommender system. And the conversational recommender system aim to provide a more human-like and more comprehensible form of eliciting user preference and recommending suitable items. Currently, there are many popular interesting topics for conversational recommender system in community. We noted most of the topics are about the underlying technology. For example, the language model, double E problems, critiquing method, also recommender system itself. Most of this CRS model is based on the pure text. Also, few of them deploy the GUI widgets, for example, buttons or critiquing interactions. What we did in this paper is not focused on the underlying technology, but sorry. Oh, okay.
I think just somebody was not muted.
Okay, right, no problem. So what we did in this paper is focus on the interaction parts in the conversational recommender system. We propose to integrate the different interaction styles in conversational recommender system to improve the interactivity and usability. To our best knowledge, this is the first research that systematically investigate the different interaction styles in CRS and how this interaction affect usability and the user experience. Since the conventional CRS is pure text-based, we want to compare this pure text CRS with multiple interaction CRS. While multimodal interface may employ a wide range of different modalities, for example, visual, auditory, and tactile. So we focus on this paper is only on visual channel. So we will use a term is mixed modality to distinguish this type of interaction form from more general multimodal interface. Next, we will introduce our mixed modality interactions. We show a comparative video to demonstrate the difference between conventional CRS, which is purely text-based, and the mixed modality interaction in CRS, which deploy various visual interactions. As we can see, the advantage of conventional CRS, the purely text left side, is more human-like and flexible to interact, but it also has many disadvantages. For example, it's complicated to interact. User has to type one sentence to express their preference or demands. This is time-consuming, and also user has to clearly and conscientiously edit their input sentence. This will increase the interact burden. For the CRS model, text-based intent detection is always hard and has a big influence on the further procedures, preference elicitation, and recommendation. All this formation part is the disadvantage of the conventional text-based CRS. But when the input options are limited, selecting from available options is also mostly quicker, resulting in higher efficiency and often reduce the user frustration. Our motivation is improving the conventional CRS user experience through combining various interactions, just like the right side model. Yeah. To more systematically explore the design option, we proposed 2 dimensions for categorizing the interactions. The first dimension refers to the location, where the GUI elements is integrated in conversational flow. We also call this anchor dimension. An anchor dimension can be located in or near the user input area, which where typically buttons are used as the shortcuts. For other texture, user response is in this part, in this position. And the third anchor could be the widgets, could be widgets attached to presented recommendation itself. In recommendation area, we can integrate some interactive widgets and other components. As the last anchor, we propose to embed the interactive elements directly in the texture output of the systems. Just like this, the system will output one sentence and the user can directly interact with it. The second dimension refers to the type of interactive element in conversation. We also call it widget dimensions. In this paper, we list 5 widgets, which are text-based, buttons, checkbox, drop-down list, and sliders. The mixed modality interactions combines the texture language-based dialogue with graphical interaction widgets. We hope this could increase the efficiency of the interaction and better disambiguation in probabilistic input recognitions. We also propose a novel inline critiquing interaction by which user can conveniently state and modify their preference. The basic idea is once the system presents a recommendation to the user, it also simultaneously generates a response, just like the left side. This response is maybe summarizing the relevant item properties as well as the user preference collected so far. In this summary, some keywords are marked that can be directly modified by the user in the text. For example, user can click on it, and if this keywords is not correctly present user preference, they can change it directly. And the left side is our inline critiquing. The right side is conventional item-based critiquing. We believe we assume compared to the item-based critiquing is more humanized and understandable. For example, in item-based critiquing, it usually lists some features for the product, but for the unprofessional user, maybe we know what is the meaning of the gears, but we don't exactly understand what does it means for us. But for the inline critiquing, we get the more humanized keywords. Maybe the easy to write is more friendly to the user. Inline critiquing compared to the text input is more efficient and error avoidance. Next part, we go to the experiment part. First, let's highlight the research questions. The first research question, as we mentioned before, we want to compare the purely text-based CRS, TB-CRS, and mixed modality interactions in CRS, MI-CRS. We want to compare whether user prefer TB-CRS or MI-CRS. The second research questions is which interaction mode are favored for different communicative tasks. For these research questions, we will evaluate the individual interaction styles in the conversational recommender system. The last research question is which presentation presentation style is preferred for the inline critiquing method. We list 3 different styles for inline critiquing. Later, we will introduce that. We did not yet implement a working CRS with the interaction integrated. Instead, the evaluation was done by video prototypes. We have 2 video prototypes of the different techniques described before, and we get 70 participants from prolific platform. We separate these 70 participants into 2 groups. The first group will watch the text-based CRS video first and fulfill the questionnaires, and then watch the mixed modality interaction CRS as the second, fulfill the questionnaires. The second group will get the inverse order. This is for reducing the experiment setting error. The questionnaires for prolific participants include 2 parts. The first part is quiz 5.0 questionnaires, and the second part is our customized questionnaires for evaluate individual interaction styles. And then we collect the data. After pre-processing, we start analyzing the progress. Next part, we show the experimental results. We hidden the numbers in this table. For the result details, you can check in our paper. So the first results is about the comparison experiment between text-based CRS and mixed modality interaction CRS. As we can see, the comparison of 2 video prototypes show a slightly better score for MICRS condition on most factors. However, after we're using the paired t-test, we only able to observe a significant difference for 1 factor. But generally speaking, the MICRS provide a better user experience than TB-CRS. Second part, we compare the GUI-based interaction method and free text. The GUI-based interaction method for responding to the virtual agent was rated consistently here. However, we also only observed 1 significant difference factors. In this part, we compare the critiquing method, which include atom-based critiquing, inline critiquing, and free text. The atom-based variant was assessed consistently better than text-only and inline critiquing variants. This is for the critiquing part. Beside the previous quantitative analysis, we asked for the user comments on different interaction methods. To demonstrate this kind of qualitative feedback, we split them to neutral, positive, and negative comments. As we can see, the GUI interactions get more positive comments, and for critiquing part, our inline critiquing get only 4 negative comments, which is quite good. We check the details comments. We found the reason why inline critiquing get many neutral comments is many participants has no idea how to interact with it. As a new critiquing form, maybe the video is not enough for the non-professional user. Last part, we compare the different style for inline critiquing. We totally list 3 styles: drop-down button, highlighted text, and underlying text. The majority prefer the drop-down button style for the inline critiquing. And less often, the other 2 variants, highlighted text and underlined text, was chosen. As we mentioned before, we only use video prototypes instead of implementing a working CRS. But video prototypes cannot substitute interacting with realistic interactive prototypes. Therefore, we intend to investigate the user of mixed modality interactions by implementing a fully interactive prototypes in the future work. This is our limitations, just show the videos. And a particular challenge for building mixed modality CRS is the question how the interactive options offered to the user can be developed automatically. Leveraging knowledge graph could be a potential method or an interesting research directions. Yeah, that's all for my presentation. Thank you for your attention, and any remarks, questions are welcome.
Thank you very much for this presentation.
Yeah.
Do people have questions?
Got a really simple-minded one, so maybe I should start with that. Well, you report the statistical tests, and you say most of the time that the structured method is better, and only a few of the differences are significant. But I would guess if you do a global test of the more structured versus the other one, including all of the measures at the same time, I'm pretty sure you'd get a significant difference overall. And then you could at least say, the MICRS is better overall, even if you can only nail down 1 or 2 dimensions where it's clearly better. That might be worth reporting it in that way, because otherwise you're basically losing out on the statistical significance of the whole thing. You understand? Maybe I didn't express myself clear. Just an easy way to show overall that the MICRS is better than the TBCRS by doing an analysis of all of the variables at once, and I'm sure it would turn out to be significantly better.
Yeah, thanks, Tony.
Any more questions?
Yes, so maybe I have one. So a typical way to evaluate critiquing-based recommender systems is the number of critiquing cycles. So do you think that your approach would lead to a reduced number of critiquing cycles? And the second small add-on question is, did you think about also developing these type of recommender systems with speech-based interaction? Because I think that text-based interaction is still some tedious way of interacting with a recommender system.
Yeah, for the speech-based recommender system, maybe has a broader will in the application, but currently what we working on is just the text-based. But I think text-based is really easy to transfer with the speech-based, so it won't be a bigger problem for these two things. Sorry, what is your first questions?
The first question was, so critiquing-based recommenders are typically evaluated in terms of the number of critiquing cycles that are needed before a user really finds the product he is searching for. And my question was, do you think, or I'm not sure if it was an outcome of your evaluation, that your approach leads to a reduced number of critiquing cycles?
For our prototypes, we didn't, we limited the critiquing size. Actually, we just show the videos, so our participants, they have no chance to get some response for the critiquing size in this dimension. But I believe it's a very important factor for the critiquing method in conversational recommender system. Maybe in our maybe after we implement a real system, we could also investigate this critiquing size. Yeah, it's very interesting, very important factors.
So I have a question about this interface. You showed them very small elements of the interface. It kind of, is there any picture which can show how it all were together in the context? Because the majority of papers on critiquing-based recommenders, they show the whole thing. And as a result, you can judge what exactly is happening. In your case, you show very small part, and it's not very easy even to understand how that's similar to other standard conversational recommenders. So, and also the related question is that what the user will see? What you show to us is what the user will see, or they also can see the whole interface? Because it's very hard to judge for both us as listeners and for the users, the whole process by using very small interaction, very small piece of interaction. Is that, yeah. So I wonder at least what the user have seen in this user study, what kind of screens they have seen to assess.
Yes, I will explain it. So we separate our participants into two groups. The first group will see the conventional CRS video first, and they will only see this part, only see the left part. We will hint the right part first. So after they see the first video, they will fulfill the questionnaires, and then the second video will show to them. And the second group will get the inverse. Will get the inverse order. They will show the mixed modality. Yeah.
What exactly the user have seen about one specific interaction case? So maybe you can share these videos because it's not really very clear. And also, I just want to point out, if this is the only type of the things you show to the user, it's considerably different from what traditional critiquing-based things doing, because you basically ask user about their preferences. But what normal critiquing system, they give you a bunch of options, right? And then they ask you what is wrong with that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and in all of your examples, you actually ask user for more information, which is not very typical. It's still okay, it's conversational, but it just, is it something that you do? You study specific types of conversational which ask user for more information, or it just your example is like that, right? And you really get much more broader set of examples to the users. That's really important to understand the user feedback to see what exactly they've seen.
Yeah, I think you're right. For the videos, we show the link in our paper. I think maybe we don't have.
Okay. I probably didn't know it. So,
Yes. We get the two separate videos in the link, and for each one is around the several minutes. Just
excellent.
Just show the whole.
You can see that, right?
Process for that. Yeah, but thanks for your feedback.
Yeah, and I agree with you. It's absolutely vital to get users' real evaluation in the context, because almost every single paper which tries get user feedback on just seeing things and then getting user and trying that reports different results. The seeing is definitely not using. It's become almost like a famous thing. Everyone who tries to do that can show that it's not the same thing. Easy target. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. I think we need to move on for the next presentation. Thank you for your comments on the last one. Oops, sorry. So we have now our second presentation, which is called Controlling Personalized Recommendations in 2 dimensions with a carousel-based interface. We see.
Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen. So it's presented by Binam Radari.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Binam Radari. I'm a PhD student at the School of Computing and Information at University of Pittsburgh. I'm a student of Dr. Bersilowski. So today I'm presenting our paper called Controlling Personalized Recommendations in 2 dimensions with a carousel-based interface. So, in recent years, user control and user interaction in recommender system gains a lot of attention, and there is a simple reason for that, because user control allows both the artificial and human intelligence to collaborate together to get better and more relevant results for the user. Well, in many cases, even the previous presenter also mentioned that an example of that is when we have a cold start program, or even when we are in the middle of the recommendation process. In many cases, the system cannot reliably model the user behavior. So in this case, also the interaction plays a very important role. So basically, when we can ask the user specifically what they want, why we should bother and predict that with many mathematical and statistical model. So the user interaction, so basically the user interaction can help the recommender system to generate the results that are more fit for each individual user. And this interaction and this interactivity and control usually comes in a form of a intelligent user interface, or the user interface, which most of the time is intelligent as well. It's not a recent thing. There are a lot of controllable and interactive recommender system, but almost all of them are just focusing on one dimension of the control. For example, engagement of peers, or strength of contributing a source. So for example, if they have multiple sources of recommendation, we allow user to tune what source is more important for the user, or what peers of the user they think that they should put more attention to in order to get better results. So what we're presenting here, what we're having in this paper is adding one more dimension to the user control, which basically we're considering how the items are generated and also how the items are presented. So the user can basically control both in the generation process and also in the presentation process. And we achieve this goal by using or by employing carousels as a presentation medium. The carousels are a very good tool for our purpose, because each carousel can be considered as a ranked list of item, and then we have multiple ranked list of items that they need to be ranked again. So we have two dimensions to work with. Okay, so basically one dimension is how the items within each row of carousel are ranked, and also how the carousel itself themselves are ranked for the user. So to showcase our the research, we used the Grapevine system, which is a system that we are developing in the University of Pittsburgh School of Computing and Information. This is a system that helps the students who are interested in research, but they don't know enough about the research. We help them to find research advisors, and we recently also add the function for them to also find relevant courses based on their interest. So instead of just explaining everything in this very small picture, I'm going to actually go to the actual system and show you the very short demo of how the system works. Just to confirm, can you see now this web page?
Yes,
okay, great. Okay, great. So basically, the Grapevine system helps undergraduate students with, as I mentioned, with less experience in research to find relevant research advisors and courses in our department. So in order to help them, we just create this very simple landing page that the student can select one of these many topics to start with. I'll just go with the natural language processing, NLP. So as soon as you add one topic to your profile of interest, you will see that this list of results that are presented in a carousel. So for example, the first carousel represents top advisors, the second the top courses, and then like female advisors. You can have whatever you want, and then you can browse these list from left to right, and also you can go from top to bottom. So I'm not going to explain all the details about the system. There is a paper in Hypertext that explains basically everything, single details of this. So I'm just going to show you how this two-dimensional representation works. So basically, the user can add multiple, like for example, I can also add data mining from the similar keyword that are presented to the user. I can also search for a keyword. For example, I can also add like machine learning. And then, so that the first dimension of the user control is they can tune the user their profile of interest. So for example, now I have 3 different topics in my profile, but I'm more interested in natural language processing, less in data mining, and a lot in the machine learning. So as you can see that the results are updating immediately after I change the user interface, the importance of each keyword. You can have as many as you want, or if you don't want any of them, if you want if you don't want one of them, you can just remove that from this. So here's one dimension that the user can control, but also we add this part, which is the carousel setting. So imagine that you are a graduate student. So I also want to see that only the courses that are only available for the graduate students. I'm not interested in top courses, because these are the mixture of graduate and undergraduate courses. So I have the control I can move. So basically, I determine the rank of the results that I'm seeing, as well as I can hide or show a different category of items that are presented. But the changes in the user profile would affect all these carousels at the same time. However, then you can also go there and then change the presentation as well. So this was a very short demo of how the system works. Now let's move on to, okay, let me just show you one more thing from the demo. And if you want more information about each faculty, each advisor, you can also click here and go to the, see all the research interests of that faculty, and also we can add this, add the items from list to here as well. And also if the students, as I mentioned, there are students that are not very good at research. So if they have a question about any of these recommended or similar keywords, they can click on the question mark, then get the summary of that topic from Wikipedia. So let's go back to the presentation. Yeah, I think show you this. And then these are the details of the dialog, the pop-up dialog. That there are basically everything that I showed you so far they help the students to explore and find new area of interest, and at the same time they can control those area of interest, and that they can control how the results are presented to the user. So to do that, the demo that I showed you is working with a knowledge graph that we created. It's a Neo4j native graph database, and here is the top schema of the knowledge graph. We have the advisors, the persons in the graph. They're work in a department. They teach courses. The courses are offered by the department. The advisors publish papers, and then papers has key phrases, and also courses has key phrases as well. So we created this knowledge graph using, we started with a curated list of advisors, and then we find their publication from Google Scholar. We extracted their keyword using ontologies and Wikipedia, the same thing for the courses, and we then created this interconnected graph and basically feed the interface. Okay, the knowledge for the knowledge extraction, we used computer science ontology, CSO classifier, and then we enrich the topics further with the Wikipedia to check that whether there is a Wikipedia entry for that topic in Wikipedia, and then also we get those summary of the Wikipedia pages from there as well. So this is the statistics of the graph. There are only 180 researchers which are just covering our department and some of the faculties from that are doing relevant thing from the other departments. And for the recommendation algorithm, we use this we define this relevant, the notion of the relevance score, which basically, if I put it in a very simple words, it's consider both the similarity between a topic and a person or a course, as well as the value of the slider that the user specifically selected for that topic. And then it creates ranking for either advisors or courses within each carousel. And for the carousel, it's just basically just some kind of filtering that defines what goes to what carousel. So for example, we have top faculties in one carousel. If you are interested to see only female faculties, we filter out all the male faculties out of this, and then you have the carousel that represent only female faculties. And for the similar keyword recommendation, we incorporate all the information that we have, including like publication courses that are department and advisor, to find a similar a set of similar keywords to any given keyword. Yes, and I think that's it with my presentation. I will share the link to this demo if you want to try it. And I'd be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you for the great presentation and for showing us so much about the demo. So, any questions? Yeah, so I've seen a raised hand, I think, from Javadjan. Was this on purpose? Yeah.
No, it was clap. I was clapping.
Okay. Oh, you were clapping. Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Wrong semantics.
Thank you for the clapping.
She's also nice. So, but yeah, questions. I mean, so the starting off. So maybe I have a. It's kind of. It's not completely related to your presentation, but I was curious to see a recommendation algorithm for advisors that had female advisor as a category. Why is it? Yeah. Why as a female advisor?
So this research is a continuation to a research that we've been doing for, I think now it's like almost 3 years. Mm-hmm. And we started very simple, and we developed many different iterations of the system. And throughout this way, we get user feedback constantly. We pay a lot of attention to the user feedbacks. Mm-hmm. And this was one thing that was very important for the user to be able to filter the results based on their preferences. It's not just that the results are good, but they wanted to have the results categorized based on their preferences. Mm-hmm. And I think for many female research students, they want to know what are their options, at least what are their options, who are the female researcher at their department, at their school, who can they collaborate it with. So that was the intention behind that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. That's great,
before the study, in fact, we get a number of focus groups with several different types of students to ask them what are essential things and stuff like that. So it was like several stages of development. I just posted a link for the paper which tells how it was developed. We get through like 10 or more iterations. And I think it's the right way to discuss for us at this workshop that HCI principles should be applied not only when the recommender is done, but in fact to design the recommender to solicit users' feedback about important things. So what this previous paper showed, that exactly this kind of study, where we asking the user what is the right thing to do even before the final version is designed. I think we should really all apply this good HCI ideas in our field.
Yeah, definitely, that's a good idea. So it's interesting to see that you really got the stakeholders that are intended to use the system on board. That's great work. Yeah. Any other questions from the group? Thanks for sharing the reference.
And if you're wondering, we're planning to formally evaluate this system as well. So hopefully we can share the results of the evaluation as well in the future, near future.
That's awesome, yeah. Are you going to test it then in different university settings, or is it then rolled out?
Hopefully, yeah. Of course, if you have an offer, we would be happy to do that.
We're happy to collaborate, but the point of the good system is a good data. It took us a lot of time to get the right data, to clean up the data, and that make this high fidelity studies. So that is not just like, hey, getting another bunch of stuff. Usually things are outdated, the key phrase is not always extracted right. So, well,
sure,
so if anyone like to invest in this efforts, would be happy to try it in a different university or in a group of universities.
Yeah, it would be nice, because I think students in many universities face this issue that they don't know how to work with. But I think we have a question now in the chat from
Okay. I just read the question. So the question is, do you consider any difference between the person who is active in some field or the researchers that did the research in the past? So to answer this question, I have to get back to the point that Peter mentioned. It's very difficult to get the data, especially in our case, and this is a very, very difficult thing to do, to track the the fact that how proactive and how like how many papers each person is publishing every year. And although we have multiple in multiple instances, we get the latest information about the advisors. However, it's not a real-time thing. So, but there is this guarantee. So if you are a faculty and you in a university like University of Pittsburgh, so basically you are active in research. If I understand the question correctly.
But I think it's a very good question. So generally, if we like to do research-based recommendations, like experts for the field, you really need to look at people who has been working with that reasonably recently. There should be some threshold. So I'm 30 years in academia, and I did something like when I was in my first 5 years. I probably not really care about that. Fortunately, in our case, it really doesn't matter, because I still can advise people even on the topics I've been doing 30 years ago, right? So that's essentially not finding somebody you like to do PhD on a specific focus yet. And in fact, it's more focusing on undergraduate than on graduate students. It's more finding people who can at least tell you something about that. And the more variety, in that case, the better. So in fact, if you take all your career in the account, you get more topics covered. So, but it's a really good question. So really, it's if you like to get finer grain recommender or a different topic, it might be consideration. And it's hard to do it right.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah. Thank you. Any more questions? Yeah, no, just looking at the chat.
Well, it looks like there is nothing there. So
I think there's nothing there.
We can do our wrap-up session. It's supposed to be 20 minutes for wrap-up. Now we have only 10 minutes for wrap-up. Who's wrapping up? Marco, would you like to wrap it up?
Yes. Okay, so I'm very happy to see a very different kinds of papers in this session. So we have papers about interaction, papers about decision making. So this means that actually decision making is a field which is very multidisciplinary. So my first comment is that we are on the right way. So we are working on different areas. So and the very difficult point is how to integrate all these points in a focused direction. So because the field is very broad. So my first point is this. So for instance, for conversion of recommendation systems. So this is a very broad field which involves natural language processing, also interaction, and a lot of things. So this is my first comment. So are we in the how we can how to say find the right direction, which we are putting all these things together. So this is a question also for the audience. And also for the other chair.
Yeah, I think, Marco, you're right. The field is getting broader. There used to be like just a few small streams, and now maybe even the titles are kind of wrong because there are more things people explore. Maybe we call it human-centered issues in the recommender system, kind of like that. And it's very timely because human-centered AI or human AI collaborations become the topic. So we kind of, the wave finally get under us. Now everyone is interested in that. And of course, as more researchers coming in, they all contribute their levels of expertise. So it's a good question what we should do, how we can address that, increase the number of different applications and different research directions within our current research field.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so including the stakeholders, including the users into the design process of recommender systems, it's crucial. This is an essential topic, and it has to be stressed even more in the upcoming years. So because of this human-machine collaboration that we now face. And I found it quite interesting that in one of the presentations where they did a study on how users' knowledge of recommender systems influence the behavior, they found that there are many users who actually are very knowledgeable about the limits and about the power of recommender systems. So users are not naive anymore. Yeah? They are used to this type of systems. So we need to dive now, I think, even deeper into the underlying mechanisms of human decision-making in order to give them services and algorithms that really are perceived as useful, also in the upcoming future.
Well, I totally agree.
I should point out that we might also like to see what industry is doing, because in some cases, industries are kind of going ahead of us. So we, in our paper here, we talk about carousels, but in fact, we try to find enough citations in research literature about other people who explore these interfaces, and our Italian colleagues here, they did some work on that as well, but there are a limited amount of work. On the other hand, if you see in the current recommender system, almost everyone is now using carousels following Netflix. So kind of, because it turns out to be useful features which people like, it allows to get users into decision-making. I kind of know what I like to present you, but I don't know what type of things you like to see right now. Tell me the thing and then provide you the ratings. That's kind of the spirit of our workshop. So that is really kind of, well, to some extent, shame on us, right? So we have to be ahead of practice. So now the practice is somewhat ahead of us. But maybe one of the way to bring this gap is to try to talk with industry. If you're going to the industrial session, it's a stark contrast to the major other session of RecSys, because everyone else is kind of talking about pushing RMS up, using complex approaches, but more than half of the industrial session tells how the design interaction with the users, how they present a new way of user to look at the system. So apparently that's where the industry sees the biggest bang for the buck. So, well, in our community, which user-centered, kind of really need to help the rest of the recommender system people to realize, guys, kind of, there is not just like RMSE. There is also the way you interact, and that's where the biggest bang for the buck right now. So that I think is the challenge for us as a community on the other side. I wonder, is anyone in the audience has some experience collaborating with industry, not on pushing their RMSEs up, but in fact on getting better interfaces? And what is the experience?
I mean, some slight experience, I would say. So helping some industry collaborator decide how to present recommendations, whether you have them on a mobile phone or on a web page. Yeah? And actually, like, so when you have this limited space on mobile phones, so it's really crucial that you present the stuff in a very well way. Otherwise, users will just go away from the platform, and they can see this, and this is then a huge drop in money. And I think this is why industry is, of course, so engaged in this topic, because every user they lose or that they cannot convert to buying something at their platform is lost money.
So anyone who has say something about industry collaboration? If not, guys, well, I think we should do better, right? We need to find a way to work with industry, because also it's a large scale evaluation for the approaches. Industry routinely doing this experiments, so we can evaluate multiple ways of doing the interaction. We're all running the studies, but 36 people, well, it's great for research, but it's just, if you like to get something more reliable, you need to get hundreds, and industry allows to do it. And I'm glad that more and more industrial labs now looking at the interfaces. Google is quite serious now about the user side, and the Amazon is now looking at that, and IBM. So, well, looks like there's going to be opportunities.
Well, I don't know if I could call myself industry because I'm just a very small startup.
Oh,
but
you are.
To say briefly
course.
what my approach is, I basically start without by design. Working on a tool for doing some of the things that I was indicating in my talk today, but I basically start without recommendation technology and try to get everything else right. And then the idea is that at an appropriate time, we put in the recommendation technology. In other words, it's not a matter of recommendation technology looking for something to do, but rather we set up a situation where all sorts of interesting, useful things are happening. And then we ask ourselves, how can we make these things work better with recommendation technology? I don't know if that's typical at all. It may be atypical. But the one thing to remember is that when you're in the middle of a field, you always think that field is the middle of the universe. And as soon as you take one step outside of it, you see that people are thinking about all sorts of things as well. From an outside perspective, recommender system is one of a whole lot of interesting ways that you have of making your application more usable, useful, effective, and all that. So we shouldn't be surprised if some people even just ignore recommendation technology at first or use it in a marginal way. Whereas, of course, some do go whole hog into it. You have a whole broad spectrum of attitudes. And one way to look at it is that you need a toolkit with dozens of different tools and recommendations. Technology is like one type of tool, for example, wrenches, and you can't build a complex cabinet or something just with wrenches. You have to use hammers and saws and nails and stuff as well. And it's always a good idea to have a view of the entire toolkit.
Thank you, Tony. Any closing comments? We were delayed, but we should close on schedule. People might have other plans like dinner, lunch, and I'm planning to do a hike. So any last minute feedback?
Yeah,
okay.
Maybe one or two comments. So what was interesting to me is specifically the presentation of Tony, where we see that specifically in the context of group recommendation, there are many open issues. There are new requirements maybe regarding the evaluation of those systems. What I also liked was the presentation where we see that there are plenty of opportunities to merge or integrate different interaction paradigms. What I would like to see here is more work on speech-based recommenders, which from my point of view would significantly help to improve the interaction quality with recommender systems. And so from this area of analyzing psychological models and theories and integrating those into recommender systems, I still see that there is interesting ongoing work. What I do not see up to now is the more integrated view on the whole topic. So what we understand are specific biases, and to some extent we also understand how to counteract those biases, but we are still at the very beginning. And finally, I do not see, maybe we can discuss a new title of the workshop, but I think that the workshop is exactly on the right way and really deals with highly relevant questions for the recommender systems community. Thank you.
Okay, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but I'm only allowed to distribute this preprint today. So if you haven't done it yet, you can go to the chat and find it there. Maybe I put it at the end. Since we're
Thank you.
not allowed to basically to distribute it for 2 years unless we do it sort of directly face to face, and that's why.
We're face to face. That's good news.
Okay.
Great. But apart from that, I think Alexander's words were like a very nice summary of our workshop. So I would close the session now if there's no further comment from anybody.
The only comment is just like one of the 2 sessions, right? There's still another one coming, so we'll hope to see you in 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. So this is day 1. I think it was very productive. We had great presentations. I hope to see many of you on the 2nd day of our workshop. It's on September 29th on Wednesday at 10 Central European time. And this is going to be a hybrid workshop. So we will have some presentations in Amsterdam. And so 1 on-site, 2 on-site presentations and 2 virtual presentations. And then Martijn will chair the session physically. So whoever is in Amsterdam, I encourage you to go to the session. And apart from that, I wish everybody a great day or evening, depending on in which time zone you live. And yeah, see you in day 2. And hopefully also at the conference at some point.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm the host. I should be the last one to leave.
Yes, I guess you are the host.
Oh, thanks for Fatima to be our volunteer helping.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
All right, now we can close. Thanks, guys.
Okay,
well, I think it was good. Let's see. Let's do it again.
Okay, see you. Enjoy your hike.